When I was 10, my cousin committed suicide. My aunt lived in this house this occurred in, and she couldn't bear to live in the house afterwards, so we moved into the house to keep it in the family about 2 years following his death. Being only 12 at the time, it didn't really bother me to live in the house. I didn't know the details of the death until much later, but I had a sense that he probably died in the garage, because I got the most incredibly panicky, kinda creepy feeling whenever I had to go down there. I did find out that he did die in the garage, and had tried to stop himself before it was too late. My bedroom was on top of the garage, and I would occasionally hear noises in the garage at night. It wasn't until one very vivid night, when I was woken up for no reason, and I was lying there for a while trying to get back to sleep, that I got a very intense feeling that someone else was in the room with me. I closed my eyes, and I heard him walk right up to me, and though I had my eyes were closed, it was like I could see what was happening in my mind. He stopped in front of me and crouched down until his face was only inches away from mine. I could hear breathing noises, and he was looking straight into me. Then he got even closer, and his head was just above my ear, and all the while, I was completely petrified with fear. I wouldn't even open my eyes. All I could do was just lay there, waiting for him to do something. After several moments of waiting and angst, he made a noise. It wasn't a word. It was like a groan or something, and he did this right into my ear. All of a sudden, I leaped out of that bed, and the scream that accompanied it was horrifying. I had a strong feeling that it was my cousin, and that he intended no harm, but that he was trying to scare me. Years later, my other cousin who did know him well, told me stories about how he liked to try and scare people for the fun of it. Sometime after this occurrence, something else really strange happened. It was around 3 a.m. Again, I awoke for no good reason, and was laying there thinking or whatever. I began to hear a faint music playing, and it was very hard to describe how this music intensified in my head. I recognized it as the music from my little Saga Game Gear, which I kept in the spare room at the other end of the hall. I got up and stood in the middle of my room to see if I was actually hearing what I did, and then it got louder. So I stood at my door, and again, I could hear it very distinctly. I thought maybe I had left it on or something, which I never did, but at the time I thought, well, maybe. So I went down the hall cautiously, and saw the eerie light of the Game Gear, which was on, and laying on the coffee table. It was playing by itself. For a moment I thought it was the little intro cartoon they sometimes have with video games, but it wasn't that. I picked it up, and watched in my hands as the little Sonic the Hedgehog jumped for coins. I watched in disbelief for about 3 seconds, and then suddenly, the Sonic stopped, and I swear, it turned to face me and started shaking its finger back and forth in a no disapproving kind of way. Then the Game Gear turned off. Not sure how to react. I just ran back to my room and hid under the covers. The next day, I was playing Nintendo or something, being sure not to play with my Game Gear, and my mother randomly commented, "You're just like your cousin was, always playing video games." Needless to say, I broke the Game Gear habit, and have always been uncomfortable when I see a Sonic the Hedgehog anything, game, commercial, etc. Since I was a child, I would experience strange things happening. My parents recalled the incident when I was about 6 or 7 years old. My father used to live in an old farmhouse, and I can remember not liking that house too much. One day, my mother was in the kitchen making dinner, and my cousin and I were upstairs in the spare room where my stepfather kept his musical equipment from the band he played in. While up there, my cousin and I were at the window playing with the G.I. Jones or something to that effect. Suddenly, something hit one of the cymbals on the drum set. We were so frightened by this, we went flying out of the room as fast as our little legs could take us. My mother was yelling at us for playing with the drum set, and we tried to explain to her that it wasn't us. She went upstairs to check it out, but found nothing. She admits now that she believed us then, but just didn't want to frighten us. That very night, my cousin and I were trying to sleep in the living room of that old house, and we could hear the sound of someone coming down the stairs and walking to the kitchen. We were petrified and hid under our blankets. We heard the cabinets in the kitchen open and close, and also the refrigerator door open and shut. At this point, we began yelling for my mother, and she and my stepfather came out to see what was going on. My stepfather went into the kitchen, and again, as when my mother checked in the music room, nothing was there. Another time, in the same house, My mother and I were in the kitchen, and her little china plates she had hanging on the walls just started flying full force across the room, smashing on the other wall and all over the room. Needless to say, we left them there until my stepfather got home so he could see what we experienced. My mother was in the bathroom getting ready to take a shower when the toilet flushed by itself. She called for my stepfather, and all of a sudden, the floor tiles started popping up off the floor, one cutting her foot. She had to be taken to the hospital and ended up getting several stitches due to this event. We ended up moving out of this house. When I was about 12 years old, I lived in a house with my mother in Long Island, New York. I had a sense from day one that the house was filled with at least 6 or 7 different spirits, none harmful, but all from very different times, and none of them seemed related. At that point in my life, I'd always felt spirits around, but had never actually seen one, so to me, the following events were very significant. I decided to sleep on the couch bed one night. Keep in mind that the position of the couch allowed a complete view of the dining room if you were to look to your right. I'd settle into the couch bed when, after a few minutes, the room started to get increasingly cold. Keep in mind, it was summer, and I started to feel as if someone were watching me from the dining room. I turned to face the dining room, and sure enough, I saw a little boy standing there by the farthest window, no older than 5 or 6, white and cloudy looking, but also transparent. I could make out all of his features, bowl-cut hair that just ended just above his eyes, clothing of an early 1800s style, and he had his hands clasped together in front of him. He had no actual expression, but just by looking at him, I was overcome by a feeling of extreme sadness. I felt as if he was looking for a mother and father that he could not find. I turned my back from him for a split second, and when I turned back, he had vanished. That was the first and only time I ever actually saw the little boy, even though I continued to constantly feel him around me in the house. Not too long after I saw the boy, I found a stone near the bushes that surrounded my house. The stone had a carving in it of a year, though I cannot remember the exact year. I do recall it being sometime in the early 1800s. This led me to believe that it has some sort of significance to the boy's death, though, to this day, I'm not actually sure what that might be. My old high school had 4 floors to it, but when the school was first built, a fire somehow began and engulfed the entire 4th floor and the students on it. When I started going to school there, I was told that the 4th floor was haunted by a couple of my classmates, and after some research, I found out about the fire. The 4th floor was very large, but only the first half of it was used. The other classrooms were used as storage areas. The first half of the 4th floor was used as a music department, and in my second year there, I joined the chorus and began spending much of my time up there. Within only 2 weeks of being up there, I started to hear sounds coming from the storage classrooms down the hall. I could hear chairs moving around, and even stranger, I often hear people singing and playing instruments. I didn't think too much of it for some reason, until one day, when I became a little more curious. I had left my chorus class to use the ladies' room. When I reached the long hall that led to the storage area, I could hear people singing and playing what sounded like flutes. I knew it wasn't my class because of the direction of the sound. I started to creep down the hallway very slowly as the music continued, and as I reached the end of the hall and was maybe 10 feet away from the door to the storage room, the music abruptly stopped as if I had disturbed them. I ran to the floor, flung it open, and as I stood there looking into the empty storage room, I felt a huge whoosh of air go past me. Keep in mind, 4th floor had no windows. I've had that feeling before, and I knew exactly what it was, that a spirit or even multiple spirits had just gone past me. I was very freaked out after that and never wanted to go to the storage area again. It's not that the spirits seemed angry, but I got the distinct impression that they didn't want to be bothered. They had been through enough. Currently, I live in Queens, New York, and to give you an example of the kind of things I experience on a daily basis, I'll tell you this. I've only lived in my new house for about 4 months. In my bedroom, I have a canopy over my bed, which is attached to the ceiling and encloses the entire bed. On many occasions in the middle of the night, usually around 1 to 3 a.m., that's when paranormal things seem to be at their height. I will wake up to find my canopy opened, very carefully opened, not something I could have knocked open in my sleep. Keep in mind, there is a lock on my bedroom door, so it can't be any of my family members coming in, and as well as the canopy being open, I've seen a white figure, an outline of a person, definitely adult, but I'm not sure if male or female. Standing in open inches away from me, the minute I make any movement at all, the figure simply fades away. At first I thought I was dreaming it, but I've been through enough to know it's not a dream, and I'm definitely fully awake when it happens. My first haunting started when I was about 6 years old. I was raised in New York from 1953 to 1962. I played with a particular clown doll that was most unusual in its appearance. Its face was fully painted like a clown, and its hat was long and pointed with a small ball on top that stood straight up. That doll was quite haunting just looking at it, especially his smile. Regardless, it was my favorite doll. For some reason, I loved to play with that doll, and nothing else. I didn't even want to play with the neighborhood kids. I was a lonely child, and most of the day, all I did was rock in my little red rocking chair and daydream. Only recently, my mother told me that she gave me the clown doll and my little red rocking chair. That would explain my fascination for the clown doll and my little red rocking chair, because I longed to be with my mother. My aunt and uncle raised me because my father was killed in a car accident when I was just a year old. My mother couldn't afford raising 2 children alone, so she sent my brother to live in North Carolina with her sister and brother-in-law, and I stayed in New York with my father's sister and her husband. My aunt thought that I was missing out on my childhood by rocking in that chair and playing with the little clown all day, but I had my reasons. I kept rocking and playing with my doll. One evening, my uncle was out all night playing cards with his friends. Usually, when my uncle was out for the night, my aunt would ask me to sleep with her. This one particular evening, she woke me from my sleep and asked me to sleep with her, and of course, I obliged. I now believe that my aunt had seen ghosts in her bedroom and was afraid to sleep alone. My little red rocking chair was in her bedroom near the window. On the windowsill were flowers in a flower pot. My clown doll was sitting in a little red rocking chair facing the window with the flowers. I was very sleepy when my aunt woke me, so it took me no time for me to fall back to sleep in her bed. For some reason, I woke around 3 o'clock that morning and heard my chair rocking by itself. I turned my head in the direction of the rocking chair and witnessed the most profound thing I've ever encountered. My clown doll was rocking in the chair and playing with the flowers from the windowsill. The ruined reflection gave the most frightening silhouette image. The shadow of my doll rocking in my rocking chair and moving around like a person, playing with the flowers, just terrified me beyond explanation. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was not dreaming. This was real life, and I was scared like never before. My fears heightened when the doll stopped rocking and just suddenly turned its head in my direction. My heart stopped. The doll was now looking in my direction and proceeded to get out of the rocking chair and walk in my direction. Immediately, I pulled the covers over my head and held close to my aunt with a fear I never thought possible. That night was the longest night of my life. Just the fear of imagining my clown doll pulling the covers from me froze me with a sweat dripping madly from my body. Thank God, my clown doll never touched the covers. After what felt like hours later, I finally fell back to sleep. Of course, hugging very close to my aunt. When I woke up in the morning, I found my doll still sitting in my little red rocking chair with the most hideous smile on its face. I screamed like a baby and pleaded with my aunt to remove the clown doll from my little red rocking chair and throw it away. I never told my aunt this story, and I never saw that doll again until about 40 years later. To my surprise, a coworker brought it from a website that sold old dolls from the 50s. I stood and watched as my coworker unwrapped the doll from its packaging in the office. Immediately, I recognized it was my old clown doll by the hideous smile of its face. As soon as I saw that doll, I asked my coworker to please put it away immediately and explain my childhood fears surrounding the clown doll. This is a true story. Now here's my explanation. Through my years in the ministry, I've been involved in many demons, ghosts, and angels. I've seen things move around with no human interference, even in my apartment. It's as though someone was there trying to move the objects themselves. In fact, poltergeist activity is known to throw or move items around. Therefore, mischievous spirits can make things like dolls move at their own will. The basic fact to my haunting is that I was watching a demon in action. I'm no longer a minister, at least for now. I realize now that I'm very susceptible to spirits, ghosts, demons, and angels. My journey through the spirit world has been both scary and intriguing, and from this, I know there is a God, and equally know there are demons as well. My family is pretty much known to have their fair share of supernatural experiences. We don't always enjoy them. We don't always get frightened. We just try to act as if they're normal. My mother, my older sister, and I all seem to have dreams that give us insight into what will happen. When the three of us all dream of something that is symbolic of or related to death, around the same time, then someone we know passes away. It's not something we enjoy, but well, we deal with it. When I was 2, my mother and I lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment in a brownstone in Brooklyn, New York. The house itself was not haunted, as far as we know, but then again. Anyway, there would be plenty of occasions in which I was placed in my crib, and after everyone was asleep, they would come. I didn't exactly face what they were until I was around 21 years old. They would come to my bed at night and just stand there disguised as my mother, my father, and sometimes uncle. They wouldn't exactly try to harm me, but they had to know I was frightened out of my mind. I would realize they weren't my family members because they would start talking at a very slow pace and then speed up to something incredibly unintelligible, and sometimes even a different language unknown to humanity. And those things, they weren't good. They all had this interesting way of moving, almost in a shifty way. Years later, I stopped seeing them, and I found myself talking about something with my friend of mine over the phone. I'm not sure how we got into it, but the next thing I knew, we started talking about them, and I was trying to act as if they were just figments of my imagination, until it confirmed that they were labeling them demons. It's a rare occasion when they visit my dreams, or bother me these days. I'm not sure what they were looking to get through to me, though. I had been renting what I believe to be a haunted apartment in a rural town in New York called Gardner. It is actually a very old house that was made into 6 different apartments, probably built in late 1800s. I knew right away that there was another presence sharing my home, and at times, it made me very uncomfortable. I decided to have a very religious woman, minister, that I know, over to bless my home, as she told me she wanted to many times. She seemed to think my problem was with demons, not ghosts. I don't know all about that. However, I do know after she left, a series of strange things began to happen. Immediately after she left, I decided to take a bath. While in the tub, I got this strange, prickly feeling that something was watching me, and when I glanced to my right, there was a woman standing in my kitchen glaring at me. An awful feeling came over me, as if I could feel this woman's anger towards me. I quickly wrapped a towel around me and ran into the living room or bedroom area to find my boxer badge on my bed, ripping my Bible to shreds. Very unusual behavior for her. Later that evening, I was awoken from a horrific dream by what felt to be breath on my cheek. It felt like every hair on my body was standing straight in the air, and I was so cold I could hardly breathe. I looked over to my dog, who was growling in the direction I felt the breath come from and backing away with a look of terror. Needless to say, I was out the door so fast, I left the ghost spinning. About 1 month or so ago, while sitting outside on our deck around 12 a.m. or 12:30 a.m., I had a very unusual occurrence happen. Our neighbor's spotlight over his garage began flickering in quick succession. During the light flickering, I saw what seemed to be a circular light energy flying from the light source towards the deck I was sitting on. Of course, I was very surprised and a little alarmed at what I was seeing. The light energy was flying at a very fast speed. After a while, a group of 4 circles, clear white in the center, with a yellowish ring, flew over to my deck and bobbed around until it appeared to find its way and almost faced me until continuing to bob. I closed my eyes and expected when I opened them that the circles would be gone, but they weren't. The configuration was that 2 of the circles were side by side. The 3rd circle was underneath the left circle, and the 4th circle was down a bit and diagonal from the 3rd. If this wasn't enough for me for one evening, another cluster of circles, identical to the first cluster, shot over to my deck and bobbed its way to another side of my deck, doing exactly what the first cluster had done, which is to bob until it seemed to find its way, face me, and continue to bob. Honestly, my very first reaction was to think that my eyes were playing tricks on me. After this first reaction, I almost asked these clusters what they wanted from me. It was actually the only thing that came to my mind. I didn't do anything but stare at them, got frightened, and quickly went inside my house, locked the door, and raced up to bed. I wanted to wake my husband up, but I kept telling myself that this was nonsense and I was just imagining things. The following day, I did tell my husband what happened. My 13-year-old son happened to be walking by and overheard what I said to my husband. It was from my son where I first heard the word orbs. Since this experience, I continue to go out on the deck in hopes that they'll show up again, and the next time they do, I will have my camera in hand. I lived in southwestern Virginia a few years ago. I moved there to be with my boyfriend, now ex, and was getting acquainted with the region. The town I lived in was not far from the West Virginia border, and I worked at a store that was open 24 hours in Princeton. What happened one night on my way home was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It firmly cemented my faith in ghosts. I was driving home on a cold winter night in January 2000. It had snowed earlier that day, and I was exhausted. As I was heading over some railroad tracks, I inspected the land before the road intersected with the highway that would take me home, a distance of only about 100 feet. As anyone can tell you, on a clear night with fresh snow on the ground, you can see everything. I pulled my car to the stop sign and looked both ways to check for traffic. There was no one. So I looked right, in preparation for my right turn. There was a boy, a teenager, standing at my door. He looked to be about 16 or 17 at most, wearing a high school leather jacket and a ski cap, or a toboggan, as some people call them. He was fairly clean shaven, about 6 foot inches, with dark hair and an athletic build. I can remember the way he looked to this day. It is firmly etched in my mind. He was staring straight at me, but didn't make any kind of expression or even acknowledge that I was there. I went ahead and made my turn, thinking perhaps I'd overlooked him when checking both ways at the intersection. I turned to check again, and there was no sign of him. He was gone. I guess my adrenaline kicked in, because I made it in the house less than 10 minutes, when it normally took 15. To this day, I wonder if perhaps that boy had been a victim of a car accident. When I was about 14 years old, my parents and I moved into a haunted home. We began noticing little things at first, like the batteries in the remote control were being tampered with. We would use the remote control with no problem, then the next thing we knew, it wouldn't work at all. We'd open the back cover to find the batteries had been switched around backwards. This actually happened on several occasions. Then one night, my dad was watching television in the living room, while my mom and I were in the kitchen doing dishes from supper. The boombox on the sun porch suddenly began playing very loudly. We went to inspect and discovered a cassette player, and the player had been turned on. It scared the living daylights out of us because we knew the only way it would come on was if someone had physically pushed down on the play button to play. My mother shut it off, and we all talked about how strange it was. Not long after that, the batteries in the remote were switched around again. Another odd incident happened to my father. He had one false tooth, and he was in the habit to put it in a cup in the bathroom every night. Somehow, it mysteriously disappeared, and after over a week of relentlessly searching for it, we'd given up. Unbelievably, 7 months later, it somehow turned up under the refrigerator. We all seemed to have difficulty with the plumbing. Water in the bathroom sink would come on all by itself. I also remember feeling strange about our basement. It wasn't used for much, except to store stuff and house the furnace. It was damp and wet because there was a leak whenever it rained. For some unexplainable reason, I feared that basement. I wouldn't even go down there unless I was asked to retrieve something. The door to the basement was always kept shut, but I would often find that the door was open on its own, while no one else was anywhere near that area. I, my cousin, and a friend of mine had a horrible encounter one night. We were young kids and doing pretty much what little girls do, acting silly and talking girl talk. It was late in the morning hours, and when I went into the bathroom, the basement door opened on its own. It took all 3 of us to go shut that door. We were so scared, we ran real fast, closed the door, and ran back and hid under the covers. While we were whispering about the incident, we began hearing a scraping sound outside the window. It was winter, and we had snowfall all over the ground. At some point, we finally all fell asleep. The next morning on my mirror, hanging on the back of my bedroom door, we discovered an odd handprint that was oddly long, and we knew it wasn't one of our prints. Later that day, we were outside goofing off, having snowball fights, when my friend yelled for us to come back at what she discovered outside my bedroom window. In the snow, you could see footprints. They weren't anything like I'd seen before. They were like bare feet, except where the toes would be, it looked as if whatever it was had claws. I later moved out of the house on my own. After my mother passed away, I returned for 3 weeks with my children. My dad was having a hard time getting around because he was on a walker, due for surgery soon. At times, he also used a cane to walk with. After only my first week there, I was in the kitchen, reading at the table, when I heard a door shut. I go up to look around, but didn't see anything, so I went back to reading. The water in the bathroom sink then came on. I went to see what was going on. Unnerved at the thought that this was the type of thing I'd encounter as a child, I just looked around, turned it off, and went to bed. The next morning, when I went into the bathroom, behind the door was a little stand my mother used to keep a jewelry box, makeup case, and a few other things. I discovered everything was off the shelf and scattered all over the floor. Nothing happened for the next few weeks, up until my last night there. The kids were all watching television when the remote suddenly quit working. We discovered the batteries were switched backwards, exactly as they had been when I used to live there. Dad confided to me that after I'd moved out years before, things continued to happen. Little things like finding stuff in the bathroom scattered on the floor, and once finding a coffee cup lying on the kitchen floor. About 3 days after I returned home, my father called me to ask if I'd seen his cane. I replied that the last time I'd seen it, it was in his bedroom behind the door. I ended up having to go back over there to help him find it, but we never did find it. After buying a new one, about 1 or 2 weeks later, he was cleaning out a closet and found the old one. Paranormal is a part of everyone's life, but not everyone noticed it. My first encounter was around 18 years ago when I was 10. It was Christmas morning when I had lost my father. It was a devastating loss for all of us. Since then, I don't want to celebrate Christmas. Anyway, let's get to the point. The day after the funeral, I was sitting in my room. I was bummed. I didn't want to accept the truth. And then it happened. I heard my father's voice, calling my name not once, not twice, but 3 times. I couldn't believe my ears, and I raced out of my room into the kitchen. My eyes were starting to water because I didn't see him. I started to cry and headed back into my room. Then I realized that it was very bright winter's day. I mean, it was freaking December 26th, and then I saw him. My dad was standing before me, smiling, surrounded by that light. I stared at him for what seemed to be hours. Then suddenly, light started to flicker, and I heard him talking directly to me. He said to me, "I'm sorry. Be good. I have to go now. Goodbye." And then he disappeared with the light. That was the last memory I had of him. The next experience was 4 years ago, when I was in my neighbor's house. My neighbor, let's call her Z, lived with her father, let's call him A, who by the way was a creepy guy. However, Z was gifted. She could see the future through cards. I was stunned when she told me things known only by me. I went there often times, but every time I took even the slightest look to A, my head started to hurt like hell. When I shared that to Z, she told me that I was sensitive. Every time, when I get a headache, I was in a way cleansing the negative energy. I shook it off because that couldn't be true. After the seance, you know the cards. She told me that I have a big hole in my heart, a hole full of pain and sorrow. She started to cry and told me that soon, very soon, I will lose someone very close to me, and I needed to be strong at that moment. After that, I stopped going there, and a week later, she died, leaving behind her awful father. I know it's a terrible thing to say, but he was evil. I can't explain how I know, I just do. 10 days after Z's death, A got ill and died. I know my stories aren't as exciting as the others, but they are true.
Just letting you know that the person who I was supposed to lose was my mother, who died a year after Z and A. You may say it's a coincidence, but it's not. Every time I pass Z's house, I get the same headache, and I get the feeling that someone is watching me through the second floor windows where A lived. I'm 28 now, and I still get that feeling. About 20 years ago, when we lived in Navy housing on Oahu, Hawaii, my daughter and I experienced something that still haunts me. Honestly, I'm not sure what it was, and that I'm not sure if it was a ghost. At the time, we, my husband, our 2 daughters and I were living in Navy housing. I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural, and we didn't entertain such stories or thoughts in our home. It was a summer sunny day. My husband was at work, my oldest daughter was out surfing with her friend, and my youngest was at home with me. We had just finished lunch and decided to watch some TV. The TV room was just off the living room, dining room, and filled with windows and 2 doors, one to the kitchen and one to the backyard. There was a wall composed of 2 large sliding doors that separated the living and dining room from the TV room. Against that makeshift sliding door wall was a love seat that my daughter was sitting on. I was sitting on a chair opposite the love seat. The TV was to the side of us, on a low bookcase below a bank of windows. While sitting there watching TV, something shimmery, a staticky, sparkly, flashing sort of mass passed between us and the TV. It had entered from the living room into the TV room and then moved across the room and out the back door. Within seconds of seeing it, we turned to look at each other. She then jumped into my lap, and we sat hugging each other tightly for a bit before either of us could speak. I knew by her actions and the panic on her face, she had seen what I had. With fear in her voice, she asked me, "What was that?" I had no idea what it was, but I tried to reason it away. Staying as calm as I could, I told her it was probably the sun reflecting off a car passing the house. With a trembling, soft voice, almost a whisper, she replied, "But all the blinds are down." Not wanting to give in to the panic, I told her that the shades don't fit the window so tightly that light can't find its way in between window frame and shade. I then changed the subject to picking up my oldest daughter and going for shaved ice, a Hawaiian snow cone, but better. Other than telling family and friends for the next few weeks, we didn't and haven't talked about it since. We put it behind us. Fast forward 2 years later, my husband, reassigned back to Rhode Island, had moved back to the mainland to open our old home and get it ready while the girls and I were still in Hawaii. The girls still had a few months of school to finish, so he went ahead without us. The last few days on the island, I spent alone, cleaning our base housing. All our household belongings had been moved out the day before, and we were on our way back to Rhode Island. While I cleaned the house, readying it for inspection, my girls enjoyed their last few days with friends on the beach. I had cleaned the kitchen and laundry the day before and was now cleaning the bedrooms, bathrooms, and on into the living room and dining room. The whole house was floored with floor covering, which I had to sweep and mop spotless. I was mopping the living room and dining room area. The only thought in my mind was how warm it was now that the air conditioner was gone. Then, out of nowhere, appeared that same shimmering, sparkling, wild flashing mass. It crossed the room right in front of me. Being all alone and startled by what I was seeing, I packed up and left. I still hadn't mopped the TV room, nor finished the living or dining room. I didn't care. I was out of there. I grabbed my cleaning supplies, my purse, and locked the door. I left the mop and bucket with the curbside trash and got in the car and didn't look back. I have never ever seen anything like this before or after Hawaii. I've also since become more open-minded to ghosts. Once back in Rhode Island, I started watching the many supernatural and ghost hunting shows that had since started appearing on TV, and although I am open-minded now, I haven't seen any real proof. I say that because I'm still not sure what I saw in Hawaii. I still feel like there might have been a logical explanation. I'm still waiting to come across someone, somewhere, who has experienced the same thing. Someone who can tell me what it was that my daughter and I saw.
Hey guys, it's PhantomOfDarkness here, and I've got a longer video for you guys to enjoy. Hopefully these aren't stories I reread before, and hopefully these dogs that you hear in the background are not coming up on this mic, because that would be amazingly not good. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway guys, please be sure to share, like, comment, and subscribe to this video, and just share it around. Make sure it's circulating above the internet, around the internet, and just make sure that it's as good as it could possibly be so that everyone can see it in time. You know, it's Christmas time, and you know holiday season always brings out the best of giving. So what am I going to do? I'm going to give you more narrations, and you will share it to everybody in the prosperous sea. Just kidding, we don't live under the sea. It's not like we're Ariel. It's not like the mermaid or whatever the hell that one Disney show was. And I'm gonna get demonetized because I said that. Oh no. Oh frickin' no. Anyway guys, okay, this is the worst outro I've ever made in my life, so I'm trying hard to give you guys the best outro ever, but it's just not working. Anyway guys, good night, good morning, and I'll see you in the next video. Love you always. Ha ha ha, you thought I was going to end the outro then? No, I'm not going to do that. Not after I talked about Ariel and living under the sea with the Disney characters and such. Yeah, why would I do that? I mean, this is product placement, right? I'm talking about Ariel, and I don't even know how that shit works. I'm a YouTuber. See, I want to tell you that I know all these things, like I'm really intelligent when it comes to like business, like savvy and everything, but all I do is tell you guys to share the video, and I mean, that's just it. So, I mean, I don't know why I'm finding excuses to talk to you guys, basically. I don't want this conversation to end because, I don't know, I feel like it's an interaction that we're having personally with each other, and so when I end this outro, this very, very long outro that has completely no purpose to it, you guys at the end of the day will be like, what the hell, I don't understand this, but I'm gonna laugh anyway, because that's what outros need. You need to just share the video. And then after that, we can talk about how you shared it, like a piece of pie or something. Not the mathematical calculation pie. Nobody cares about that. Nobody likes math. I like math, actually. I'm a really big fan of math. No, I don't really like math. I'm just kidding. That's why I'm doing YouTube, because I'm not an architect or anything like that. Anyway, guys, no, seriously, good night, good morning, and I'll see you in the next video. Love you so much. Please stay safe during the holidays. I love you all. And just remember that if there is a way, things will happen, and it will be successful if you make it happen. Just go with it. I'm crazy.